Welcome to another edition of the Willy Bragg Show. Today, our guest will be Dr. Sherry Weiss. Dr. Sherry Weiss, Sherry, I guess I can call you Sherry, can I?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Or you? Okay. I'll let you introduce yourself, and we'll get underway.
Okay. Well, I'm Sherry Wise. I am an economist. I work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Anything that I say, anything that Willie and I discuss is really my opinion. I'm not representing my employer. Let's see. I have a degree in agricultural economics, a PhD from Iowa State University, which is Go Cyclones, one of the great land grant universities, and a top-notch ag economics school. However, when I was in graduate school, I saw the way the profession started to change, and it was really a disappointing thing. So over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time looking into alternative ways of thinking about economics. And so that's kind of how I got here.
Okay. All right. And I guess we're fellow co-workers at KRTD too, KRTD Media. Yep. So yeah, and I'm glad to have you here. And it's great seeing you again. I met you in person at Rage Against the War Machine, you and Shane for the first time in person. And that was great and everything. And I'm gonna tell you, I took some pictures of y'all, but let me tell you what happened to my phone on the way back on the train. I lost my phone.
Oh no!
I had to get a new phone.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know where the hell it went. I was like, I was under the seat. So where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? I was like panicking. So I have no idea where it went. So yeah. Yeah. So anyways, all those pictures I took at Rage Against War Machine. I don't know. So
I have a bunch of pictures that I took, and I can send them to you if you want.
Oh, could you please? Yeah. I saw a picture of myself the other day on your Facebook page. I was like, "Oh, my hair is so out of place." It was funny.
That was a bad picture because the sun was like right in the worst angle, and so it was like. So anyway,
no, I was having a bad hair day. That was why it was, it was me. So anyway, I guess what we'll be talking about is modern monetary theory, and I guess a host of other issues. A libertarian friend of mine told me recently that he was listening to a lecture online about modern monetary theory, and he told me that even though it's everything he totally opposes, he was almost convinced, he was almost sold on it. And so I think it's probably a good thing that we need to discuss this, because a lot of people sort of think, well, yeah, a lot of people think that a lot of people can't have nice things in this country because we can't, quote unquote, can't afford it, or for a variety of reasons. So I'm gonna let you explain modern monetary theory and let everyone know why we can have nice things.
Well, modern monetary theory is really what comes down to is it's an insight about the way federal funding occurs, and the way the relationship between like taxes and revenues and monetary policy. It recognizes that there's this broad myth that just like every household or every business, they have to balance the books. But with modern monetary theory, what it recognizes is that some countries, like the United States, their currency issuers. So it's not the case that the government has to wait around for people to pay their taxes and then it can spend. So it's not like the government's going to get a insufficient funds fee or something when people don't pay their taxes on time. What it is it recognizes that the real limitation in a country that is a currency issuer, the real limitation is actually the economy, and what is produced. It's the productive capacity of the country, and so that's that's one of the things that I think is really an important insight with respect to MMT, because it has a lot of implications then for what we can do with economic policy and with federal tax, with federal spending and things like that. So let me back up just a minute and talk a little bit about what economics is, because I think a lot of people don't understand what it really is. People tend to think it's about money, but it's really not about money. Economics is about really two things. One is how a society allocates its resources. And the other thing, but this part has unfortunately been neglected by modern economics. The other part is how society allocates the surplus that comes about from the employing of the resources. So in other words, we have a country, in the US, we have a rich country. What are we producing? How are we producing it? And are we making the best use of the resources that we have? And we keep in mind, one of the things that's important with MMT and the job guarantee that they subsequently support is that humans are resources too, and so we all have productive capacity, except maybe unfortunately some people who were born or came through life and had some kind of a misfortune. But human beings are productive forces, and that's important because people want to they want to find work that they enjoy. They want to, and most people, I think, want to be productive and have a purpose in life. And so that's one thing about modern monetary theory. It recognizes what we're trying to do. What's important in society is to look at the resources that are available in society, and how we can make best use of those things, recognizing that resources include human resources. And another thing is that modern monetary theory, I think, helps us understand is that what we do when we produce things, usually what happens is we come out with we have a market economy, so we come out. So the result of this production is typically profit. What happens to that profit? Where does that go? Unfortunately, what we have is a situation where our society has really kind of ignored that aspect of profit in the sense of where is it going? And is it going somewhere that in a sense is fair? Are people really being paid the value of their production? And is it fair for, some people to capture all the gains that, the productive gains over a period of several decades? Is that fair for just one group of people to be able to basically capture that? So what modern monetary theory does is it helps us to understand that there's kind of a broader perspective of talking about economics. It's not just about money. It's about the resources, how we use them. And it's also about how we fund the how we can fund we can use how we fund government investments, government spending, things like that. So one thing that modern monetary theory does is it emphasizes, I think, at least the way I interpret it, I think it emphasizes the best use of our resources. So if you think about it, half of our budget goes to the military, right? Is that a productive use?
Absolutely not.
It isn't. Because not only is it not productive, it's actually, when those resources are deployed, they're destructive. And that's the intent of them. I think with modern monetary theory, it helps you to get at the understanding that resources that we use can be used to help society grow, can help society. In other words, we invest in people, we invest in things. And when the government invests in those things, that actually helps the country grow. And as the country grows, then all of society can be better off if we have policies that don't allow certain people to capture all the benefits. So anyway, I'm sorry, that's kind of a long-winded thing.
No,
it's not really what it's about, but kind of my interpretation.
No, that's a wealth of information there. I did ponder some questions in me with the way you explained it. So does it tie into the way our modern economy, can it be tied into the way a modern economy is run? Because today we're more of a service sector economy, whereas we were traditionally a manufacturing base. Would a return to a more protectionist economy, which I consider myself a protectionist, but would a return to a protectionist economy make MMT more viable, or does it matter whether we're a service sector economy like we are currently these days, or would it return back to a manufacturing base the way we used to be? Would it make it easier?
I think the thing is, I don't think MMT really has an influence. I mean, I don't think that really matters. I don't think the composition of the industries really matters that much for MMT, except that if the composition of those industries that make up our economy, if those industries tend to be more extractive than productive, then what's going to happen is eventually you'll impoverish, you'll make the society poorer. And what that means in terms of MMT is it means that there's less productive resources or less productivity around to kind of bear the burden of the taxes and things like that. And more importantly, the less productivity we have, this actually does limit how much money we can produce.
Mm-hmm.
So, because when we are able to produce a lot, again, it's the modern money, the value of the money is determined by the productive capacity of the economy. And so when we're able to produce a lot and we create a lot of wealth, then what happens is, the government can spend money and then people can take that money and use that money without creating inflation.
Okay. Yeah. Because I was told, when it came to the issue of inflation, I was told that if we returned to a protectionist base like I always wanted to, that it would end up having high prices all over the place and everything. Although I will argue that we have inflation anyway, and that the inflation that we have today, especially now, is due to the supply chain crisis of the after effects of COVID, returning to normalcy, and the supply chain being kind of interrupted because of COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. There's actually a different we've seen inflation in different things. So first, let me talk about the inflation that you and I experience every day. When we go to the store. You're right. For one thing, the war affected things. And so, because that created a lot of problems with the supply chain, we also had problems with COVID because we basically stopped production for a while, and that created a lot of problems. And then we ended up with transportation problems and all kinds of things. But the inflation that you and I are experiencing also comes about because really, in a sense, we've had a lot of concentration of industry, and those industries, when they're concentrated, they have market power, and that enables them to raise prices higher than if we had a lot of competition in an industry. And so we've seen over the last 40 years a massive increase in industry concentration because we basically stopped enforcing our antitrust laws. That's basically what happened. And so now we have, what happens is corporations, especially in times of rising prices, they can bump it up a little more and say, oh, people won't notice. Won't notice that little extra, so they can pad their profit because, how can you know what's being caused by inflation and what's being caused by them just deciding they want to make more money. There's that, but there's also another form of inflation that we have kind of felt more indirectly. So the first kind of inflation that I was discussing, that really has nothing to do with the supply of money in the economy. But the second type of inflation that I'm going to discuss really does have something to do with the amount of money in the economy. And that is basically when we saw all this money being pumped into the economy after the financial crisis, after COVID, after the war, all this stuff, right? What's been happening is that money goes into it doesn't actually go into the economy. It goes into these big banks, and it goes, basically, the wealthy people are able to, it basically just goes to the 1%. And the 1% then uses that money to invest in financial assets, which helps bring the stock market up, things like that. They also now are increasingly investing in real estate. And so that's been bringing home prices up and rent up and things like that. So we have had inflation attributable to the increase in the money supply basically at the highest levels, because they're the ones that benefited from all that money going into the banks and into the economy. That money was not distributed to the rest of us. And so the rest of us weren't seeing, we're not seeing, our assets increase in value. If anything, a lot of them are going down. And so inflation is a complicated thing. And there's a guy named, you probably heard of him, Milton Friedman, who, was a real free market economist. And he had a quote that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. And he said that because he basically didn't like, he really didn't like, he wanted a small government, really, is what it was. He wanted a very small government. He was really, and he wanted an inactive government. A monetary policy is a very kind of a difficult tool to help get a lot of things done. So what he was trying to do was he was trying to basically distract people by saying that, well, this is all because there's too much money in the economy. But that actually is not the case at all. If there's a lot of money in the economy, but people aren't using it, that isn't necessarily going to cause inflation.
Yeah, Milton Friedman, what's called modern day neoliberalism, and I know that Chile's economy under Pinochet was like a playground for the Chicago school back in the 70s, and then in the United States in the last half century, and in the UK and pretty much the West, it's been like a model and kind of a basis on why we can't have nice things, and we are seeing more to the negative side of the so-called free market and authoritarianism creeping up side by side. I have always noticed that as a correlation. But backing up your point, the term that when you're talking about companies just kind of arbitrarily raising prices because they can, somebody came up with a term that I like called greedflation. And I've always thought, I never thought about the term, but I was like, that is a perfect term.
Yeah, that's a great term.
Yeah.
And they do it in a lot of subtle ways. Like, I'm sure you notice, like, pasta boxes, like boxes of, like, say, penne or something like that. Used to be they were always 16 ounces, 1 pound. Then they dipped down to 14.25 ounces. And now they're 12 ounces, And so these are sneaky ways that corporations go about raising prices. And, a lot of times people just don't really notice.
They'll shrink the boxes size and shrink the quantity at the same time. And yeah. Funny you mentioned that. I had pasta tonight for dinner. So when you said penne.
So, well, it's a favorite of mine.
Yeah. So, it is too. Yeah. I gotta kind of watch my figure. I have noticed that over the years when they change a design box in its size and shrink it. I have actually noticed that over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of their tricks. So yeah, and they do definitely. I mean, even in the news, it was reported that corporations were saying, hey, we know price, there's inflation of these inputs and stuff. And so we're going to take a little for ourselves. So, that's definitely something that has been happening. Now, again, as I said, a lot of that has come about because we've allowed industries to become so concentrated that you really don't have a lot of choices a lot of times when you go, to the grocery store and stuff. You may think that you have a lot of choices because it looks like there's a bunch of different brands, but in fact, maybe two, 3 companies own those brands. And so in the end, you're really not getting the choice. And in my opinion, too, and there's been some research to support this, you also don't get as much innovation because when you're, when you're a company that has monopoly power in a market, or a lot of market power, even if you're not a monopoly, you don't really have an incentive to change things up. You don't have an incentive to make your product better, or that kind of thing. Now, they might disagree with that, but the fact of the matter is, competition really does sort of drive more innovation and more choices, things like that. So the Milton Friedman actually was also one of the people behind the the failure to, basically the government's decision to really stop enforcing antitrust. that came out of the University of Chicago, mostly, not all, but most of the people who really pushed against antitrust policy were people from the University of California, in particular Robert Bork, and another one, Richard Posner.
Okay. Now, the one thing that Milton Friedman was for, I think he was for it, and it's the one thing that a lot of Milton Friedman advocates seem to be not for, was universal basic income.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that caught me by surprise that someone like him would be in favor of a universal basic income.
He was also a supporter of the earned income tax adjustment. Now, the thing is that with universal basic income, I'm not really sure what his angle was with that. But one of the problems with universal basic income is that what it really is. For one thing, it helps reduce the incentive to produce. Okay, so that means you don't have as much production going on in the economy, and when that happens, you can have increased prices. And one of the real concerns is that really ultimately those increased prices will really, in the end, end up going ultimately to like rents and property, and that actually will end up filtering up to the top. So there's a concern. So that's one of the big concerns about universal basic income. And I think Milton Friedman, he was okay with money going up to the top.
Obviously, yeah. For what I read about him and everything, and all. So, and I know that I think he sort of advocated that authoritarian governments was the best form of government to have his economic plans put into action. So
Right.
Apparently, he was not particularly democracy friendly.
It was not something that he really cared about when it came down to it. And in fact, we know that the history of Chile, Allende, I think he proposed, I can't remember what it was that he proposed, basically nationalizing it. And that's when they decided, okay, this isn't going to work. And they installed Pinochet. And what they did was, my understanding is, they actually killed a lot of the economists. There were a lot of Marxist economists in Chile. A lot of them were killed, and basically, choices were taken away from people. And so, yeah, the whole Chicago. The whole Chicago impact on Chile was really forced on people. It was not something that people voted for or anything like that. In fact, one of the people who's also a character I particularly have issues with is an economist by the name of James Buchanan. And he created basically a whole field of economics called public choice. And what that is it's basically an economic analysis of government. But always in the end, the purpose of the whole thing is to make government out to be a terrible waste to society. Well, James Buchanan, one of the things that he was really into was constitutional. He was very interested in the economics and the law, and especially constitutional law. And so he was in favor of basically making constitutions, creating constitutions, and I think advised countries in other parts of the world, advised them on constitutions that basically are, limit democratic choice, that are not democratic at all. He was somebody who, there's a great book out called Democracy in Chains, and it was written by a woman by the name of, oh darn, I can't think of her name. It'll come to me, but this book was really about James Buchanan and the movement that he created, and one of the things that inspired him to do this was he was from Virginia, where I am now, and this was quite a few years ago. He was very offended by Brown versus Board of Education. And that was one of the things that motivated him. He was an economist, but that was one of the things that motivated him to get into the field to create this field of public choice, basically as, a way of trying to discourage, of trying to minimize government.
Wow. Okay. So he was also motivated by race, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. McLean is her last name. I think it's Nancy McLean.
Well, but interesting you mentioned about using the Constitution, because with my particular politics, from right of center people politically in the spectrum that criticizes my politics, they claim that I absolutely oppose everything that has anything to do with this constitutional republic, and they always say, "Oh, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic." I'll tell them, we're a constitutional republic or a representative democracy. We're a hybrid of both. But and then they'll try to just shout me down about that. But they'll claim that my calls for Medicare for all, like what they have in Canada, or National Health Service like they have in the UK, their universal healthcare systems, violates the Constitution. And I was told, I was asked by somebody if I could add an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, what would I add? And I said that I would actually add an amendment explicitly calling for a medical system that's guaranteed medical coverage for the entire American population, no questions asked. That is to be made a priority. But I will argue that we already have it in the Constitution, with the 8th Amendment and the 13th Amendment. Both actually would in my opinion, the market approach that we have toward healthcare violates our Constitution. Cruel and unusual punishment based on the inability to afford healthcare where people suffer, and the employee-based coverage that we have in a lot of places, which basically means involuntary servitude, which violates the 13th Amendment, because people stay in jobs that they hate because they are scared they're going to lose their health insurance. I was in a job for 20 years that got on my last nerve. We got laid off, and I miss one thing I do miss about my previous job is the union. That I do miss. Mm-hmm. I wish I had my UFCW back, but suffice to say that the idea of being pinned down in a job because if you don't have health care and you get sick, I mean, you could lose everything. I mean, you be in instant poverty. Yeah. So any thoughts on that?
Well, being a federal employee long time ago, I decided to put a Constitution app on my phone. And so I have here the preamble of the Constitution that says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to perform a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. I'm sorry, my screen just went blank. Just give me a second.
Oh no, that's okay. I can see. Yeah.
So right there in the preamble of the Constitution, it says that the government is supposed to take care, is supposed to provide for the general welfare of the people of the United States. That's what forming a country is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about, creating a nation state so that, people can protect themselves and people can work together, to create something, that makes everybody's life better. And, I completely agree with you. I've been without health insurance in the past, and I know exactly what you mean. It's totally true. People stay in jobs because, what are you going to do if you have a little kid who has, like leukemia or something, or even just something like diabetes? You're not going to, well, now we have Obamacare and we have some options there, but that's far from perfect. But it used to be case that, if you left your job and you had a kid with diabetes, you weren't going to get insurance. And in fact, they used all kinds of excuses not to cover people. So it was really hard. It used to be really hard just to get people on your own. Get for people to get health insurance on their own. And then, insurance companies have an incentive to not take you on because, they're taking a big risk if you end up having, a lot of health issues. And I agree. I'm completely in agreement that our system of health insurance through the employer is really, really limiting a lot of the potential that we have in this country for innovation, new ideas, for, because, how many people are there that, they're in a job, they have a great idea, they want to maybe, start a business, but they can't because they're terrified, because their wife has allergies or something, I really think that, first of all, in a way, it really doesn't make sense for companies to have, to be the providers of health insurance. It really actually adds to their costs of production, and it helps us become less competitive, on a world basis. So it really kind of makes no sense. But to me, it seems like what it's about is about power. Especially when you have an industry, when you have increasing concentration in our economy, so you don't have so many small firms. Instead, you have big companies, and basically they keep people trapped.
Mm-hmm.
Let me also say this. I think it was, I can't remember which. Oh, it was. Robert, what's his name? I can't. Sorry, I'm getting old. I can't think of names anymore. Robert Solow. He's a really famous economist. Won the Nobel Prize and all that kind of stuff. In 1962 or 63, he wrote an article in the American Economic Review, which is like the premier econ journal. He wrote an article where he basically just debunked the whole idea of private health insurance. And I've written about this myself. Basically, economists who are honest, if they really think about it, every single way that you can violate a market, in other words, create a market failure, every single aspect of market failures is seen in our health insurance system. I mean, everything. There's externalities in it because people who take care of their health, they're less likely to get sick and cause more people to get sick. There's information issues because when you go to a doctor, you're seeing that doctor. That doctor is the expert. You're not. So you don't know whether they're, whether the information they're providing you is good or not good. So there's information that's called information asymmetries. You don't really know how good the product essentially of health service that you're purchasing is necessarily, at least when you're actually doing it. You may know after the fact, but market power is another market failure that economists look to. Well, the whole insurance, the whole medical industry is just rife with all kinds of market power issues. You have, the pharmaceutical industry. You have, medical equipment, and now we have like private equity buying up hospitals and stuff like that. So there's market power. There's just every aspect of a failure that can take place in the market is right there inherent in the health industry. And so it absolutely should be, in my opinion, and as a professional economist, it should be something that the government provides, or single payer.
Yeah, the way I look at it, this is something that I would think would be that somebody, whether it's somebody like myself that I'm a socialist, or somebody who's like a hardcore capitalist that's not tied in with the medical industry in any way, shape, or form, would be for, because the way I look at health care, it would, like, even from a pro-free market perspective, from a conservative capitalist free market perspective, it's a disguised capital gains tax cut. That's the way I look at it, because if the government is taking care of this, where the employer will be totally out of their hands, or they'll pay very little into it, and by doing so, they'll be able to reinvest in their company. And for workers, it could translate into better wages. And if you're lucky enough to belong to a union, more vacation time or things like that. I just think it's a win-win. And I do think that labor costs, like insurance, health coverage currently, is the biggest cost of, I think that medical inflation is the biggest cost of labor costs today. So when people say, oh, it's the unions that drove all these companies out of the country, I think out of the entire West, the United States always had the weakest unions out of the West anyway. So I never bought into the idea that the unions were too uppity and too strong and too demanding. I think that some of the manufacturing base would return to the United States, because the cost of labor, even if the wages were higher, the cost of labor would still be lower, because healthcare would be available to everyone. I mean, that's kind of the way I see it.
Oh, I totally agree. I've never really understood why small business people aren't in favor of public health care, because they really are at a disadvantage, in terms of hiring people. When people look for a job, they want a job that that meets a lot of different things. There's not just pay, but they want to feel like they belong, and they feel like they're contributing. And a lot of times you can get that when you're working for a small employer, because a lot of people, really believe in their employer and so. But if you're a good employee, even if you love your job with a small employer, if you get a job with a big corporation that has health insurance, that's where you're going to go.
Exactly.
So I think it puts small businesses at a real disadvantage. And I agree. I think that it also puts all businesses at an extremely uncompetitive cost, in an extremely uncompetitive cost situation. A lot of some of these companies, they're not just paying health insurance for their current employers. Some of them are paying like premiums on, retirees, and I'm sorry, I started losing my train of thought there. But and the other thing is, it helps people to become more productive because, for one thing, even with the medical insurance medical system we have now, even though if you have good coverage, you still usually have to pay a copay or stuff like that, or a deductible. But if you don't have health insurance, then you're really gonna then you got to pay everything out of pocket, and I think it basically creates an incentive for people to not go to the doctor, even when they're sick. And so you're going to have people who come into work who, didn't go to the doctor because they couldn't afford it and couldn't afford to take the day off work, and they may be serving meals at a restaurant, interacting with people in a convenience store or something like that. When people don't have health insurance, they don't take care of their health, and that puts all of us in a situation where we're more prone as well to be unhealthy. In addition, we don't really have a good sense of, we really don't use preventative care the way we should. And, of course, if you don't have health insurance, that's going to be the last thing you think of, preventative care. You're not going to go to the doctor every year to get an annual exam. You're not going to necessarily know if you have high blood pressure until it's too late. Or, there's lots of conditions that people can have, and not really know about it until things become really bad. So there's so many things that put people at a disadvantage. And in fact, what you said about their wages is absolutely correct. This has been shown. There's plenty of studies that show that people are not getting wage increases because health insurance costs go up every year. And so some of what might have been a wage increase is going to go to an insurance payment.
Yeah, I used to, in my previous job, I used to dread negotiations for the new contract because every cycle I knew that we were going to go and give back a little bit to the company. And this is exactly what happened. I was just like, well, gee, it's not the greatest contract in the world. It's better than not having a union from my perspective, but it's not the greatest contract in the world. But it happened every time. It was just like, just a little more they take away from us. Yeah. And that was the ongoing thing in the 20 years I worked for that previous company. Yeah. Now, but a term I like to use for universal health care in this country, something where I guess a socialist like myself, or somebody who's like a big time proponent of free market capitalism from a conservative perspective, I like to refer to it as non-exploitive economic growth for the economy if we were to have such a system.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, something that kind of, that's actually what would be the best for society. For one thing, we don't want to exploit people. We don't want to exploit the environment, animals, things like that. Because in the long run, you end up paying for these things. The costs always come due at some point. And what we really want to see is if, economic growth is a good thing, because that means people can be better off. That's what the part of what the American dream was about, that, every generation would do better than their parents. And that was true through my generation, and I'm a baby boomer, but it is no longer the case. And that should be a national embarrassment, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm grateful that I'm not poor. I'm okay, and I probably won't die, in dire poverty either, because my parents made a lot of smart decisions, smarter than I can ever. They had a little more common sense than I do. However, a lot of people who are younger generations, they it's like a rigged economy, and they're not going to have the opportunities that even Generation X people like myself we're kind of feeling it. We're like, I think the Generation X, like the first generation, they're doing a little worse than the preceding generation.
Yeah.
And the millennials, they're going to be a little bit worse off, and Generation Z, and it's going to progress or regress, depending however you want to look at it. And
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, for one thing, they're paying a lot more for college. When I was a kid, when I went to college, I went to a state college. It was $400. Okay, so I know there's inflation.
Oh, yeah, of course.
but it was still $400 a month for a semester for tuition, and $400 a semester for room and board. That was still pretty darn good, even back in 1976.
You could work a summer job and pay for your college back then.
Right.
And you didn't have to go into student debt. And now,
and this is the thing. There were loans, but they were publicly subsidized loans. There was no private sector involvement, except that that private sector, there were private sector banks that actually made the loans. But the whole terms were based on basically, helping to subsidize you. So the interest rate was subsidized. They didn't charge all these crazy fees and things like that. So the loans were much more manageable, much more manageable. And also, you didn't need to take that much in the way of loans anyway, because it didn't cost a whole lot. I think a lot of the people that I knew, they either paid their way or they took out loans, and they, just were able to pay them off pretty quickly. But nowadays we have the private sector more actively involved in granting loans to students. And the universities, they've also kind of gotten in on the act, because they're, they've in the past, they got kickbacks and stuff like that. But that was a scandal, I don't know, in the 90s or maybe in the 2000s, maybe it was something like that. But in addition, university schools cost a lot more. And so they're borrowing a lot more. And the government has never really raised the limit on the government guaranteed loans. So that means you have to get private loans. And some of them, they charge interest while you're still in school. In the under the old loans, if you went back to school, they would pause your loan and didn't charge you interest or anything like that. And you could appeal if you needed some help in terms of like paying it back and stuff. That you could work with them, and you didn't get all these crazy fees. But nowadays, students are paying so much more for school. They got to borrow a lot more, and they just have these onerous fees that are just incredible. I mean, you miss a payment, they charge charge you some kind of extra fee, and there's people that end up years later still paying. They still have like the original amount that they have to pay off, because all they've been paying on is fees and interest. And I mean, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I know that some states it was either low cost tuition, and in some states their state colleges were even free. And I don't think there's any place where they have any free colleges anymore. I don't think they do. But even faculty are kind of exploited, because there was a time you could be a professor at a university, and I mean, and this is a good thing. You could be a professor. You had a career. You had a job with benefits and a retirement and everything. Mm-hmm. And now you're kind of like on contract per course and all this. I know this because my dad got a PhD late in life. Mm-hmm. And so he, after he retired back in the 1990s, he and my mother, they moved to Puerto Rico, and he was teaching at the base at Roosevelt Roads before they closed the base down. Mm-hmm. He was teaching some college courses for, was it Texas Central, I believe it was. I think it was Texas Central. So he was teaching some college courses, and they find a way to exploit these faculty professors, and they have he wasn't doing it for prestige, but it's like you have the prestige of being a doctor, being called a doctor, but at the same time they're paying you exploitive wages too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. My father-in-law was a college professor, and he made, he went to Iowa. He taught at Iowa State, where I got my PhD. He was the chair of the English department for a while, and he made a very good living. His wife didn't have to work, and they had a wonderful life. During his working years, and they were able to put away, a lot of money, enough that my mother-in-law, she's taken care of for the rest of her life, even though my father-in-law is now gone. Mm-hmm. And back then the college professors not only made, a decent living, but also they had security. But nowadays, they basically, there is still tenure, but it's harder to get. It's very hard to get. And certain professions, certain fields, like say English, art, those kinds of professions, those kinds of fields, it's very difficult to get a tenure track job in those fields. And so, what happens is, people, they'll get like a 2-year appointment. And these are people who, are actually doing this like full time, they'll get like a 2-year appointment, and they will, get paid maybe by the course. And then at the end mm-hmm. of the 2 years, they end up having to, go someplace else. And so they spend their whole, these people can spend their whole career just in a series of like 2-year appointments. And those are people that actually are relatively better off than, for instance, like you were saying, with your father, people who want to maybe teach part-time or something like that, or all they can get is part-time jobs. There are a lot of professors, nowadays who basically they make a living because by working part-time at this school and part-time at that school and part-time at a third school, and somehow they just try to cobble together a living. It's just it's terribly abusive. It's really, really abusive. And at the same time, you have all these administrators. I mean, it's just incredible how many more like administrative positions there are. It's, and these people get paid a lot of money. So, and college presidents, they get paid a lot of money, so it's just terrible.
Yeah, well, in regard to my dad, I mean, only reason he didn't complain about it, he's already, he had a nice retirement, and
Right.
And he invested his money well, yeah, because my dad's a retired public school teacher, here in the North Carolina public school system all these years. He bought back some years from the military because dealing with kids, so he was able to do his full 30 years by working 20 years for North Carolina, which I was like, wow, if I could just buy back some years and retire early, that would be great, but unfortunately I can't do that, myself. Yeah. My little joke about it is I'm the only socialist in the family, and I'm like the only person in my family that's ever worked in the private sector. Everybody in my family all around me have worked for the state government or the federal government, or whatever level around the United States. And I'm like, and I ended up working for the private sector. That's funny. So it's just kind of ironic and all of that. But I'm kind of running out of time. Is there any final thoughts?
Let's see. Well, let me say one thing. There's an economist by the name of Michael Hudson, and he's written I'm sorry.
Oh, I was agreeing with you.
And he's written quite a few books, and he gets at a lot of the issues that we've been talking about. And one of the things that he talks about in his books is that the government can invest in society and invest in a way that helps lower the costs of living, and not just production, but just living. And we used to have economic policy that did this kind of thing. And that is what made us competitive. That's what made us productive. Instead, what we have now is we have an economic system that really is being pushed to raise the cost of living in like pretty much every way. And so, but what happens is the people who are at an advantage in this situation are people in the financial sector and those kinds of extractive industries. And so what we need to do is I think it's important to recognize that economics is not just, economics is not an excuse to make everybody live a terrible life. It shouldn't be. There are, things in economics that actually you can use economics in a way that can help people articulate a need for a better life, need for a better society. So what we want is what the classical economists, what they were interested in is looking at ways that we can help the economy grow and also for people to share in that growth. And that was really, a lot of what Adam Smith's Invisible Hand was about, it was about, basically people, in competition, kind of doing their thing and helping the economy to grow and everybody to benefit, rather than, say, the king's buddy who he just gave a shipbuilding monopoly to. So, and so, you know, economics has been misused for political advantage. And it's time that we stop that, because economics is really an important issue, and but there's no reason why we can't have a society that that understands economics and uses it to benefit themselves, rather than allowing basically an elite group of people who know about economics try to hide the truth and use the lies to make their lives better at the expense of everybody else.
Yeah, and the way I look at the economy, it's like I look at the economy as it's kind of like a rigged system that just at every opportunity kind of works against ordinary people to deprive as much opportunity as they can from people, and just just the things that the thing that the whole scenario of after you graduate high school or after you graduate college and you can work at a job for 25, 30, 35 years, and as long as you work at that job and you did a satisfactory performance, you got paid your living wage and you got good vacation time and a good retirement, and that concept has just been taken away from people. And if you advocate that, they're like, oh well, you're so old fashioned. I was like, well, I guess I am old fashioned. So in that regard, I am. When it comes,
I mean, Keynes recognized this, that and economies don't have to be to just, you let things run amok. You can actually do productive things. You can actually help people in the society. And in fact, you should. And that is, that is the most productive thing. It's really, in the end, much more efficient because, you're not wasting all these resources. You think about all the people who live in poverty and never have a chance to fulfill their potential. But a lot of those people, you could have people who could come up with all kinds of medical advances and scientific advances if those people were ever able to have a decent shot in life. But instead, what we have is, you're correct. It's a rigged system, and it's been rigged specifically by people like Milton Friedman, who took advantage of a situation. What they did was basically, they took advantage of a lot of the economic turmoil that happened in the 1970s. And they basically were able, because they were funded by and, worked with a lot of, rich people and, a lot of economic interests, business interests and stuff. They worked with them specifically to rig it. Not enforcing the law is a way of like antitrust law. That's a way of rigging the society. Milton Friedman came up with this crazy idea that shareholders should be that corporation, the purpose of corporations is to maximize shareholder value. Well, that's just crazy. That's, that was not what the purpose of that is. But yet what that has done is it has given a lot of financial interests a lot of power to basically change the corporate structures, and change the thinking of a lot of people, to basically make it so that some people are able to just take advantage of all and capture all the gains that society together produces. You know?
I am allowed to name. I know we're not allowed to discuss candidates. Am I allowed to name certain laws? Like, am I certain legislations in Congress? If not, I won't mention it.
Well, I'm not. I probably won't really know.
Okay, I won't mention it. Okay, I'm just going to say just broadly, there are legislations that are they're the law of the land that's not enforced, and that are supposed to be for the benefit of workers in this country. There's one piece of legislation from 1978 that's supposed to guarantee full employment to this. You might know, you probably know the legislation I'm talking about. It's supposed to guarantee full employment for the population. It's not enforced.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the Federal Reserve is supposed to, basically is supposed to maintain maintain low levels of interest and also maintain low levels of unemployment. And the Federal Reserve just doesn't even think about that at all. And in fact, Jay Powell came out with a statement a few months ago talking about inflation and saying that we should have inflation at 2%. And that's just something like there's no justification whatsoever to have inflation at 2%. And he said, basically, wages should not be allowed to increase enough to threaten the potential of achieving 2%. So, what he's doing is basically saying people shouldn't be paid as much, and if we have to cause unemployment to make that happen, that's okay.
This whole idea of unemployment. I mean, I fundamentally believe in full employment. I mean, I just think full employment makes sense. If I were to run for office, part of my platform would be full employment. You got to revitalize the infrastructure, and I'll be like, guarantee jobs for all Americans who wants to work, for example, along with the medical care and things of that nature. And I going to probably have to go in a second, but any other final words? And
well, I just think I think it's important for people to become more knowledgeable about economics and understand that economics can be it should not be used against people. Economics should be used to help people. And I think we've got the whole profession, it doesn't even think about that anymore, which is really a problem for the profession. And it's really made it, honestly, kind of a laughing stock in a lot of ways, because we come up with these crazy theories and things like that. But I hope that someday we can put humanity back in economics, and get back to the kind of economic thinking that dominated when I was a kid, which was about trying to help people make their lives help to make people's lives better, and also to give everybody a chance.
Oh, one question. Do you have a favorite economist? Is there an economist that you admire more than anybody else?
I really like of living economists. I really like Michael Hudson. He is a pretty much of a Marxist economist, but that he's not he's not a what do you call a kind of a he's kind of flexible in his thinking, and so he's not like basically wedded to what Marx thought about this, that, and the other thing. I think Michael Hudson more thinks of himself as a classical economist, and other than that, like long term, I guess it would be Keynes, because he was such an original thinker, and in the end, it sounds like he was kind of a nasty guy, but he really actually did believe that people should have a chance. And, he actually had hope for humanity. He wrote a book called The Economic Prospects for Our Grandchildren. And in that, he talked about how productivity would allow all people to have, much easier lives, and, for society to be more successful and stuff. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened because we got diverted, and my other thinking that I think was just really unfortunate. So Keynes would, I guess, be my favorite dead economist.
A couple of interesting things. Long-term wise, I am a big admirer of John Kenneth Galbraith.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, definitely. And when I used to subscribe to magazines before I started getting all my news on the internet, I used to subscribe to the Progressive magazine. And I used to religiously read that magazine. And it was so nice seeing him on the editorial board when he was alive. John Kenneth Galbraith. It was like, oh, he's still alive. But that was like back in the late 1990s and all of that. Mm-hmm. So, and then today I would say Richard Wolff. I enjoy listening to Richard Wolff, listening to him. They call him a Marxist economist, and maybe he describes himself as such, but my socialism is more on the social democratic side. I look at Sweden, I look at Norway, and and that's basically my model. If I were to go more radical than that, maybe Yugoslavia under Tito. If I were to go extreme far left, before he died, not obviously not in his early days, but my dad, who's a little more conservative, he's a Republican. He has conservative economic leanings, but he told me an interesting story that he got his degree at UNC Chapel Hill, and what was required reading, which would not be considered required, it is equivalent today, wouldn't be considered required reading because the country's ideologically shifted so far to the right. But what was required reading in 1962 was The Other America by Michael Harrington. Yeah, he said because when he found out when we were sitting there talking about it, and I mentioned back in the early days when I was became a socialist, talking about Michael Harrington. He said, I heard of Michael Harrington. I read his book The Other America when I was in college. I said, get out of here. He said, no, it was required reading in the economics department. I mean, they talked about The Other America. They would not do that today. Today would be some neoliberal worldview. And, while people claim that we're headed toward cultural Marxism or whatever they want to claim, I see us unfortunately heading more toward, just what I consider ugly about capitalism in our modern times, and would like to see it, essentially put to a stop.
Yeah.
Well,
let me tell you who my favorite Secretary of Agriculture is. That was Henry Wallace.
Your vice president under FDR. Yes. Yep.
His father actually was Secretary of Agriculture in the 1920s under not Hoover, Harding. And then, and he was a Republican, but FDR wanted him to be Secretary of Agriculture, and I think he was resistant at first, but he decided to, and then eventually I think he became a Democrat. But yeah, he was, and he actually was an economist too. But he was a successful businessman, and he really, he really, just he was very open-minded, very, very progressive. He actually, I'm not sure if he was a communist, but he had a lot of sympathy for communism.
In 1948, I am allowed to historically talk about past campaigns, right? Yeah, 1948, the Democratic Party split three ways. The Dixiecrats ran Strom Thurmond, who was the governor of South Carolina, and the former Vice President Henry Wallace. Since Harry Truman was his replacement, they ran the Progressive Party in 1948 that year, and so that they ran to the left. And so everybody thought that. Everybody thought that Dewey was going to win that election since the Democratic Party was so divided. Henceforth, why Truman had this "Dewey wins" headlines on the newspaper, because everybody thought that hello. Oh, okay. Everybody thought that that he was going to lose. I'm sure Harry Truman also thought he was going to lose. Of course. Yeah. My candidate in 1948 would have been Norman Thomas, because I come from the Eugene Debs, Norman Thomas tradition of socialism adjacent to Michael Harrington. So yes, so yeah, that's great. Great having you here, and all that. I'm going to have you back.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. It was nice to talk with you, Willie.
All right. We have here on the chat line, and we'll talk to some people here on the chat line, and I have to talk to you briefly when the show's off the air. So
okay,
it's not usually the chat lines are fairly long, but it's not that long this evening. But that's a good thing. I'm sometimes there's some people that will just spam and just type the same thing over and over again. It's like let's see, Miguel. Hey, how are you? We have Around the World D and Friends here. Hello. I'm working on having her, Dolores, come on the show, by the way.
Oh, that'd be good.
Yes. Daniel Berry Sports Highlight says, yo. And Miguel says here, hey, hi, D, at Around the World D's and Friends. Let's see here. Yo, Daniel Berry Sports Highlight. And of course, Warren is here, Extra Boya. Hey, Warren. Hello, fellow travelers.
Hello, Warren.
Yeah. Let's see, Bragg Bulla 2024. Along with that.
That sounds like a good team.
I think Warren will make a better president than me. But thank you, Warren. Let's see. Hey, Extra Bulla. I consider myself a Richard Marxist. Oh.
I think he probably means Richard Wolff.
Yeah, I think so. Yes. It took me a second right there. Let's see. We have here, hey, Miguel. Let's see. Let's see. Willie calls these chat lines like they're old timey. Let's see. This show is wonderful. Thanks, Warren. I appreciate that. By the way, Dr. Sherry Weiss, very interesting interview, says Miguel.
Well, thank you.
All right. And let's see. Richard Marx says, FTW. Okay. Well, everyone, be sure to drop by again on the Willy Bragg Show. And thank you, Sherry, for dropping by.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And if y'all like what you heard, please press like. It helps with the algorithms here. Also, feel free to comment, and we'll have a conversation, bad, good, or indifferent. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we are, in fact, the muckrakers of our time. I really mean that. Everybody, go ahead and form your own platforms, because they're after all of us. Also, remember to reject corporate media and to subscribe to this channel here. Hit the notification bell. Also, follow me on Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter, where I seem to live all the time. And also follow all of us at KRTD Media. All that's in the description box below. And until next time, folks, I am Willy Bragg. I will see you all later. Music.